Hi, everyone. My name is Lucia Stafford. I am a recent civil engineering graduate from the University of Toronto. I studied sustainability and how we can integrate more environmentally friendly solutions in engineering design and integrate them into our cities. So I've always been very passionate about sustainability, and that led me to working with Reap Green Solutions. In part one, Sophie gave us a great introduction to climate change and why it's important that we take action. So in part two, we're going to find out our own household's impact on the climate. And we'll do this by answering some simple questions to discover the greenhouse gas emissions associated with our lives. So the Project Neutral Carbon Footprint Calculator will help us to learn about our impact in 5 main categories. So first is home energy, which is heating your home in the winter and cooling it in the summer. The second is daily transportation, so how you get to school or how your family members get to work. The third is travel, so mainly airplane trips. And the fourth is food, so what types of food we buy and eat. And then the fifth is waste, so the things we throw away and the places that we send them to. So these 5 categories don't encompass everything. There are other areas to look at and to consider when calculating your carbon footprint, such as the type and amount of clothing you buy. But these 5 categories are a good place to start and to start reducing our footprint. So what's in your control? It's important to note that when it comes to reducing our own carbon footprints, there are some things that we do not have control over. As a teenager, you may feel like there are many things out of your control. You probably don't do the grocery shopping in your family or have a choice over what type of heating system goes into your basement. And you may not have the ability to make all the low carbon choices that you want to. So you can only do what you can do with the resources that are available to you. And that's totally okay. Sometimes the things that we feel we don't have control over may indicate where we can advocate for change. So if you don't have bus access in your area, you can encourage your city to improve public transit. So just before we dive in and measure our footprints, where do you think most of your emissions come from? So take a moment and pause the video and fill out your worksheet, predicting what you think your lowest and highest categories will be. So now we're going to head to the schools.projectneutral.org to calculate our carbon footprints. And I'm going to share my screen and walk through the questions. So you can follow along and measure your own footprint with me or finish watching the video and calculate it later. So let's get started. And throughout the calculator, there's going to be these pages that pop up with more information. Feel free to read this later. This is mainly for people who don't have a facilitator working through it with them. So we're just going to skim over those. So first, it's going to ask you about your city. So I live in Toronto, but there's lots of different options. And if you don't live in Ontario or even Canada, there's options for that too. Next, we're going to get an idea of how big your household is. So when you think about your home, if there's anyone under 13, they're going to be qualified as a child. And then anybody older is going to be an adult or teenager. The next section is going to be talking about our home energy. So when you're filling this out, there's going to be several different options. And when you're looking through this, you're going to see detached home, which is just a freestanding house, and then a semi-detached house, which shares one wall with a neighbor, a townhouse, which shares 2 walls with their neighbors, and then an apartment or a condo. And if you do live in a detached house, it's going to ask you how many bedrooms it has, and then how many stories, including the basement. And so I live in an apartment with 2 bedrooms. But then after that, it's going to ask you how old your home is. And this is to get an idea of how energy efficient it is. So how good of a job it does at cooling in the summer and heating in the winter, because newer buildings tend to be more efficient than older ones. And when you're filling this out, just fill this out to the best of your knowledge, and you can always go back and change things if you get more information later. So the next thing we're going to talk about is transportation emissions. And so here we're going to be thinking about our weekly habits and how we get around. So feel free to click off all the ones that apply to you. And when it comes to the driving one, a lot of you may not have your own driver's license, but if you get a ride with a family member or a friend and that's how you get to school, then you can think of that as your driving section. So think about what type of car you're being driven in and then how much time you're spending in it. So there's going to be different options. And then when you're filling out how much time you're spending in the car during the week, we're thinking about each day. And then on the weekend, we want to know the total amount of time you're spending in the car. And it's okay if this isn't always true. Your week to week, it's going to look different. So just fill this out for an approximate week and what that would look like. And then finally, we're going to ask how this car is powered. So if it's a plug-in electric or if it's hybrid, which runs both on electricity and gasoline, if it's full gasoline or if it's diesel. Next, we're going to talk about travel emissions. And here we're going to really focus on air travel because that's what really emits the most amount of carbon. And so when you're filling this out, think about round trips and how many people are flying in your household. So if you and your family took a trip to Mexico and then came home and there's 4 of you in the family, that would be 4 trips. Next, we're going to talk about our food emissions. And here we're going to get a sense of what your eating habits are and whether or not you throw out a lot of food. So here there's different options: vegan, vegetarian, average omnivore, and meat lover. And then also we're going to ask whether you compost. And here, with composting, sometimes not all buildings or cities have a composting program, so you might not be able to. So whenever you're filling this out, please don't feel bad about anything. Everyone's situation will look different. And then finally, we're going to talk about our waste. So here we want to know whether you use a garbage bin and you wheel it to the curb or whether you use garbage bags. So if you live in a house, you're probably wheeling a bin to the curb for pickup. And so think about how big this bin is and then how often your pickup is. So typically most cities do a weekly pickup, but some cities might have one that's more frequent. So then if you are like me and you live in an apartment building, you may more likely use garbage bags. And so just think of how many garbage bags a week you might use and fill that out. And then when you think about this, visualize one black garbage bag holds about 4 grocery-sized bags of waste when it's full. And then finally, whether you recycle. So now that we have all that information, we can get to the fun part and see our carbon footprint and get the results. Very nice. So now you're going to see, the first thing you're going to notice is this bar chart where there's 3 separate bars. There's one that's going to be your carbon footprint, and then there's one for the average project neutral participant, and then the top 30% of project neutral. And then you're also going to see that it's been separated into those 5 categories that we've been talking about. And so to give you a bit more of a picture about this, there's 1 ton of CO2 can be visualized as a balloon the size of a bus. So our annual carbon footprint can be visualized as 11 buses. And then if you want some more information, you can scroll down and look at some example scenarios. And you can look at which one resonates the most with you and then how they filled it out. And this can just help you have a bit more of an idea of where you stack up with someone who's more likely in your situation. And how you could also more accurately fill out the calculator and then how you could improve your situation as well. So if you haven't calculated your footprint yet, take a moment to pause the video before our next check-in. Great. Now that you've calculated your footprint, I want to know if you were surprised by your results. So what was your highest and your lowest category? Why do you think that category is the highest or lowest? Take a moment to reflect this and discuss. When we calculate our carbon footprints, we start to learn more about our impact and the ways we can make real life changes to lower it. In part 3, we'll talk more about the ways we can take meaningful climate action. I'll see you guys there.